What's up, Internet? Welcome back. This is Loser22. The Sega Genesis Mini was an awesome product released by Sega, and I'd like to see them tackle more of their consoles, or more of their obscure consoles. So I want to look at them and kind of decide what different attributes each one should have. So today I want to look at the Sega Saturn and what the Sega Saturn could have and should have. But before I get into it, let me just remind you guys that this is a forum discussion video. So if you're excited for a possible Sega Saturn Mini, leave it down below for discussion and subscribe for more content. The Sega Saturn is Sega's 32-bit console within the 5th generation of home video game consoles. This console came right after the Sega Genesis, which was a big hit in the US, so you'd assume that the Saturn would be just as hyped. But unfortunately, this console did not do as well, and there's a variety of reasons for that. For one, they didn't expect 3D gaming would be as important as the PlayStation did, so that's why simple polygon games looked just better on the PlayStation. But that's beside the point, because this video is all about how Sega should make or go about selling a Saturn Mini. Now, I'm not going to pretend like I understand anything technical when it comes to the Saturn, but I do know that it has 2 main CPU processors and a total of 8 processors. And that's a variety of graphics chips, sound chips, and all that stuff. So yeah, it is a little complicated. And there's no secret that it's been really hard to emulate this console, and that's why we haven't seen true emulation of this console. Instead, we've been seeing PC ports of games that existed. And what I mean by that, if I didn't make myself clear, was imagine a game, let's say like Sonic R. You've probably played Sonic R, but you have not played the Sonic R on the Saturn unless you actually literally played it on the Saturn. The version you've played on, whether it's on GameCube or PC, was literally a port of the original PC port of the original Saturn game. So it's a port of a port of a port. And whenever you do that, things degrade over time. And there's actually a lot of elements that don't transfer over because you just can't transfer over because only the Saturn can do these particular elements. So yeah, it's really hard to develop for, and it's complicated. But if Sega's able to pull off a Saturn Mini, I think they hold one of the mini consoles out there that retro gamers actually would be willing to spend a little bit more on it, just because we all understand how hard it is to develop for it. And a lot of people are nostalgic for it and they just want to go back. Or there's Sega enthusiasts like myself who didn't even know or didn't even have the ability to check out a Saturn at the time, and now they want to go back, but it's just too complicated to purchase a Saturn that's not already destroyed and find those games that are kind of costing a pretty penny unless you get a Japanese version of it. So I think there's actually interest in this, but how will Sega go about it? That's the question. Now, before they even consider designing the Sega Saturn Mini, they need to compile all of the old documents for the original Sega Saturn console so that they have a 110% understanding of how the console is designed and how it works. So whether they decide to go with ARM or x86, they can emulate it well. But what if they took all of those documents and went ahead and started work on an FPGA processor? Built from the ground up from Sega themselves, using the documents that only their eyes can see. I think it may be possible that they could make the lowest possible cost FPGA and possibly the most efficient one, because they would know exactly how the Sega Saturn works. I mean, they are Sega themselves, so hopefully they still have those documents laying around. And that would hopefully make this become a reality. Even if they could improve the emulation within ARM or x86, that's still a benefit. So I think it would be wise for them to actually put this into effect. Get those documents, Sega, and start building this thing out. Even if you decide to go an FPGA, that would be even greater, because then many of the original Sega fans would be excited. Now, when it comes to the Sega Saturn software, there's honestly not that much to choose from unless they start pulling from the Japanese games, because the Sega Saturn actually did well in Japan, so there's a lot more software for that region. So, I mean, they could pull from those. But if I was Sega and I had to look at all the games to pick, of course you would go with the essentials, like all the fighting games that are really big on the Saturn. Virtual Fighter, I'm looking at you, and then there's racing games, Daytona, right? And I believe the first Daytona is not the best one, so make sure that you guys get the best one. I'm not big on Daytona, but I do have nostalgic memories with the Daytona arcade because it was the loudest thing in my local arcade. And then there are other essentials like Burning Rangers, Panzer Dragoon, And of course, Nights into Dreams, that's the #1 game they need on that thing. In fact, they could even release a third-party 3D controller and people can just buy it after they buy the Saturn Mini itself. Now, because the library is so small, they could actually develop a museum of some sorts and go crazy with all of the commercials that exist, all of the pre-production photos and sketches and all that cool stuff. It would be pretty cool. In fact, if you played Sonic Jam, you know that there's a prototype for Sonic Adventure in there where you move around and you go into those little museums. They could utilize that to go into the museums within the Sega Saturn Mini, and I think that would be pretty awesome. Just imagine you're running around as the Sonic Jam Sonic character, going to all these museums, essentially the Sega Saturn Museum, but in a virtual world type of thing. And the reason why they would want to use this is to include Sonic Jam in a compilation like this is kind of pointless, but Sonic Jam, that little mini thing, that's kind of part of the Sega Saturn's history because the Sega Saturn didn't really have a Sonic game. So that would be a great opportunity in having their mascot and using it and playing that and it making sense. Of course, they should add all of the Sonic games that were released for Saturn that do make sense. Like, since 3D Blast wasn't on the Genesis Mini, they could put it on the Saturn. Although, I hope that they allow us to use the Genesis music, because I prefer the Genesis music. And then Sonic R, which I know a lot of people don't like it, especially with the music. But I'm willing to say that I actually enjoyed Sonic R, especially if you hunt for all the medals to unlock all the characters. That game actually starts to get fun. Now, you are wrestling with the controls just like Sonic 3D Blast, but I think that game is an experience worth having. Now, to end this up, what I will say is I hope that they take the Sega Saturn and make it the de facto way of having a Sega Saturn museum, I guess in a digital environment. Anyone who's willing to buy this is anyone who loved Sega and would love to have all the memories of what Sega offered during the Saturn years. I know that having like commercials of the Sega products, having all these like documents, you can find all this online. But if you look at all of the other mini consoles, you can find all those ROMs and emulators online, no problem. The fact that these are selling well has nothing to do with how easy they are to find online. It's with how easy it is for someone else to just come in, compile all the greatness that made these consoles great, and then sell it at a flat rate price. Now, with the Sega Saturn, I feel like many people didn't get to experience this, many people want to experience this, and I think Sega could make this happen. This would probably be a bigger investment compared to the other Sega consoles, but I think this one will be worth it in the long term because I think many people will buy it, and I think any technology that they develop while making this can be used in future products. Well, anyways, I really hope Sega makes this Sega Saturn Mini, but what did you guys think? Did you guys think that Sega Saturn can pull this off, or do you think they can't? Let me know down below for discussion, and subscribe for more content.